All right, good afternoon. Welcome on this beautiful November day. We're thrilled you're able to join us for one of CAST's free webinars today. We're live in Wakefield, Massachusetts. I'm Allison Posey. I'll be facilitating the conversation today. We know our classrooms are diverse, whether we're educating young students or adults. The diversity includes a full range of abilities and languages, genders, classes, ethnicities, races. We know there are different backgrounds, thresholds, and tolerances in what motivates and interests our learners, in what drives their passions, and what feels threatening, what feels distracting. And as educators, we work every day to get to know these learners, to design opportunities and experiences that optimize high-level learning. However, this diversity can feel overwhelming. How can we reach every individual? So today, I'm really looking forward to a discussion about strategies that align culturally relevant pedagogy with universal design for learning as a part of inclusive practices and with a lens on social justice. We'll offer strategies to value our differences and design quality contexts for all learners to reach expert learning. So I want to give you all, thank you all for joining today. I want to give you an opportunity to share your goals for this session. So you've taken time out of your day today to join us. And so if you would just like to share in the chat box, you can make sure that you're typing it to everyone. And just let us know, what are your goals? What do you hope to learn through this conversation today? While you're sharing, I want to note that for those of you who joined live today, thank you. And feel free to chat in this chat box throughout our conversation. You can ask questions, you can contribute to the discussion. And if you're watching this recording at a later time, thank you for joining, even if you're sitting in your PJs and you're with your family perhaps next week, enjoying some vacation time. But please, we'd like to also invite you to contribute to the conversation through our social media. Mindy is online with us, and she's going to help us get to your questions and to your discussion contributions. But she is also the voice behind a lot of our social media, so you can always hashtag CastPL. You can join us for the hashtag UDL chat, the first and third Wednesdays of the month. I know it happened last night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. These are there's some great ideas coming in, some great goals. That's some interesting, what do you do when your classroom lacks diversity? Oh, from Australia, hello. This is great. Excellent. Okay, thank you all for contributing. We're going to keep checking in. Also, so in addition to this video, to this session being recorded, I also want to note that the chat box we can also archive. So these tend to go by very quickly, and you're listening and you're looking and you're trying to follow the chat box. Don't worry, it doesn't have to be overwhelming to have all of those options. So we'll really try to make them available at different points once the session is over as well. So, okay. Excellent. These are really great. So keep them coming. We thought we would actually kick off today with a quick poll question, just to find out a little bit about what your UDL background is. So type 1 if you kind of know what the U, the D, and the L stand for. Type 2 if you've begun to integrate UDL in your practice. 3 if you regularly integrate UDL. And 4 if you're just one of those crazy UDL people and they all know you as that. Oh, I got some half ones, 3.5. I know it's hard to find.
Yes.
So before I introduce our guest panelists today, I do want to take a few moments really to review just a very quick overview of UDL, because we're jumping into a big crosswalk here thinking about UDL and culturally relevant pedagogy. And given the variability that we're seeing, we're even seeing some zeros, which is awesome. We're so glad that you're here. We definitely wanted to provide just a little background. So our panelists, please bear with me. I'm going to introduce you in just a moment. And so for those of you who are new to UDL, this is going to seem like a lot, but it's going to be just a very quick teaser. And for those of you who are expert at UDL, I'm going to challenge you as you're listening to perhaps edit or to embellish on the words that I'm using to give a very quick elevator, quick overview of UDL. So here it goes, it's tricky, right? UDL is a framework that can be used proactively to reduce barriers in the learning environment for all students by first establishing consistent high-level learning goals, and those might be tied to content standards, behaviors, skills. Second, you understand variability, or this predictable range that we know our learners are going to have. And so with universal design for learning, we think about variability in terms of engagement networks. What interests and motivates our learners? What helps them to persist and to self-regulate? We also know that there's going to be variability across recognition networks, and those are involved in what we perceive, so what you see and what you hear. It includes language and background comprehension. And finally, we approach variability from the standpoint of there are going to be differences in how we can physically act and show what we know, how we express ourselves, how we progress monitor towards goals. So first you want to establish those clear goals. Second, you use this thinking and this lens of variability. And finally, UDL focuses on the importance of the context, that we really focus on putting the burden of change on the learning environment and not on the individual. So UDL views that it's our curriculum that's abled or disabled, not the learner. So we design to optimize choices in the assessments, goals, materials, and methods so that the widest range of learners can progress to those high-level achieving, those high-achieving learning goals. So in a nutshell, that's an overview of UDL. And so now, as a little, it's not really a quiz, but whoop, I just went the wrong way, sorry. There is a cartoon that I want to offer you all as a challenge to think about from a UDL perspective. So you may have seen this cartoon before, and it talks about the difference between equality and equity. So in this first image here, you see that they're all given the same box. So the goal is to see the baseball game that's going on, and every learner gets a box to achieve that goal. That's equality. With equity, the second here, each learner gets what he or she needs to achieve the goal of seeing the baseball game, if that's the goal. And it focuses on the differences of the individuals. And so you might be thinking, well, wait a minute now, that could lead to potential stereotypes or labels that might be attached to the different individuals, like I'm a 1-box learner, or I'm a 2-box learner, or I don't need a box. And there's a potential feeling of difference that this might bring about, and it might even lead to a fixed mindset about your own learning. I need those 2 boxes. So what I want to challenge you all to think about, given that really brief UDL background that you may have just had, or the years of UDL experience you may have under your belt, what do you think the third image would be through the lens of universal design for learning? Did someone just give it away already?
Yeah.
Okay, this is great. Move the fence, yes, so you definitely, so you're removing the barriers. So again, you would want to focus on what the intended goal is. If there were a different goal, we'd think about different barriers. So you identify the goal, you recognize there's going to be that variability, and you do your best to remove the barriers in the learning environment from the beginning. So I want to come back to this cartoon at the end of our discussion. And I want to bring our panelists, finally I'm going to introduce them, and I want to bring them in at the end of the conversation as well to offer their insights on this cartoon. So without any further ado, thank you all for getting through that quick UDL background. I think that was important to set the stage. So with us today live, Loui Lord Nelson is a member of the CAS cadre. She's a UDL specialist for the School-Wide Integrated Framework for Transformation. Loui, that's a big one. I like this one. She's out of the University of Kansas. She's a consultant to schools, districts, states, and countries on the implementation of UDL. She's the author of Design and Deliver, Planning and Teaching UDL. She enjoys working with teachers, teacher leaders, administrators across the world, and deepening her learning through experiences of cultural immersion. Loui, thank you so much for being here today.
I'm glad to be here.
And could you just add a few thoughts to your introduction in terms of what would be some ways that you might share about your cultural identity?
Yeah, so cultural identity tends to be, you know, from where we came, what set us on our pathway and where we sit currently. So Obviously, I guess maybe I'm white. I'm a Midwesterner, so born and raised here in the state of Indiana. And I was raised in a family of educators and also had a higher ed represented in there, so that probably set me on my trajectory. Raised in a church that initially was pretty much the same, meaning kind of our same cultural backgrounds, but has grown to be very diverse. So that's an additional part of my background. And then I think a huge part of it is I have a significant background in the theater as a part of my cultural background. So being parts of other communities that are involved in theater and all that comes with that, all the personalities and people. So though some of those feel like experiences, as Joni and I will be talking about, experiences add into a cultural definition. So those are key parts, I'd say, of who I am.
Thank you. No, that's so helpful, and definitely gives a different lens, a different perspective to some of these bios. So, so Joni, you know a little more what's coming. Joni Degner is also a member of the cast cadre. She's a full-time UDL facilitator for the Bartholomew Consolidated School Corporation. Also much easier to say BCS. Out of Columbus, Indiana. In her role as a UDL facilitator, she designs professional development in UDL and cultural responsiveness for teachers and leadership, and works shoulder to shoulder with teachers to deepen their UDL understanding and implementation. She facilitates UDL conferences and workshops. She delivers awesome workshops, I'll just say from experience. So does Loui. And presents nationally on UDL on cultural responsiveness. Joni, thank you so much for being here today. And I'll ask you the same question. So can you just deepen that background a little bit just to share on your cultural identity?
Sure, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me here. And so the, you know, I've got some pretty obvious things. There are pieces about me that are the told story, kind of like Loui said. I'm a Midwesterner, obviously white. I grew up in a really small, very rural town. My family was in the hog farming business when I was younger, so I've got some experience in scraping pens. But I also, my dad was also a teacher and a football coach, so athletics was also a big part of my growing up, and having a house full of athletes and parents and things like that was pretty normal at my house. So coaching comes pretty easily to me, I suppose. Some things that also make up my cultural identity, which is fluid, of course, and changes all the time. I'm a mom and a wife, and so those are some, I guess, some bits of the told story and the untold story.
It is. I mean, this could definitely, we could be here for hours talking about these cultural identities. We want to invite you also, so many of you have given a quick introduction, but if you could take a moment and you can either reflect on your own, or please feel free to share through the chat box, what is your cultural identity? And we've given you a sentence starter here and some ideas if it's helpful. So you might say, I am A, and you could talk about race, gender, urban, suburban, the country of origin, language, socioeconomic, literacy, or add your own choices. As a white guy with a middle-class family, that's fabulous. So thank you, Charles. That's more than I had known before, which is great. And I do want to also note that several of you are picking up on this, Joni said this very quickly, but I think it's really powerful that, that you noted that it's really, these identities change. It's not a fixed thing. And they're fluid and they're dynamic. And it's important for us to recognize that the context is really important for how you might self-identify. It's also important for thinking of our role as educators as we represent these cultural identities and our beliefs in our workplaces and in our classrooms. These are great. And I like even the single word creative. I mean, there's just a lot of different ways that we bring this to life. So now we'd like to invite you to reflect and share. So we're going to be talking about this term cultural variability. And perhaps when you saw the invitation for this webinar, you maybe had some ideas of what you meant, what it means, what is cultural variability. So we want to invite you to think about how you define cultural variability. Perhaps you can do so by thinking about the cultural variability in your classroom or on your campus or in your workplace. Again, you can continue to make these comments in the box. This is fabulous. And Joni and Loui, if you want to speak to any of these, feel free to.
I just love watching them reel on by. So I probably look like my attention is everywhere because I'm looking all over the screen. But I love reading these.
And again, we will make this chat window available. This is really exciting to see the international work here that's being represented.
Yeah.
Well, I love the idea of like retired and working. I mean, there's so many pieces.
Yes, and not the hate guy. Some of you are doing these as you're on the phone with your dog.
Nice. Get some exercise. That's good.
Mm-hmm. Get those steps in. Joni, do you want to comment at all about what you had thought about? You had a reflection that you had mentioned in our discussions about Erin Meyer's book called The Cultural Gap.
So her book, The Culture Map, is I think it's really interesting because she talks about, I mean, she talks about a lot of different things in that book, but one of the things that she talks about is how trust is developed in different cultures. And as we know, I mean, if you spend any time in a classroom, or well, the truth is, if you spend any time with any people in any kind of realm of your work, I mean, you know that in order for people to work together, they have to build trust. And people build trust in different ways and engage in work differently based on level of trust. Lee, it is The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. And sorry, I'm just like responding randomly in the chat box now.
Mindy will get it for us. The Culture Map, here I'm adding it too.
I'm going to work on my self-regulation now. So I mean, one of the things that she says is that people in different cultures develop trust differently. So some examples that she gives in that book is that while like in US and Denmark and the Netherlands, people are kind of comfortable traditionally, sort of comfortable working together, even if they don't know each other very well, and even if they haven't really established any significant level of trust, which really sort of poses the idea, I think, or at least gives the implication that something I think maybe all of us sort of inherently might know or feel, which is that collaboration is kind of a US and Western sort of a classroom language, and really has become something of an organizational standard in a lot of US schools. I mean, something we expect. But in other countries of origin, so when you start talking about countries, she gives examples like Saudi Arabia and Brazil, that trust in those cultures or people that come from those countries, a lot of times that is built on personal relationships, developing personal relationships over a long period of time. And so when you think about, you know, groups of people working together, developing trust in lots of different ways, it's going to affect the way that collaboration looks. And sometimes I think that it's easy to get boxed into thinking collaboration looks like one thing. Like you get an idea of like, here's what collaboration looks like, right? It looks like really active, and it looks like people kind of sharing ideas and talking, a lot of verbal kind of information. But there are lots of ways for people to collaborate that will, I think, honor the trust that level that they develop together, and that allows people to that honors well the term that we're talking about is cultural variability, right? That honors the way that they learn and interact with other people.
And that's such an interesting, very subtle example of what we might, a moment that we might take for granted, exactly how important those cultural backgrounds really are and how varied they really are. Loui, you had mentioned also a book, and I'm not going to get their names quite right, by Maya.
Oh, Maya Kalyanpur and Beth Harry. It's just called Culture in Special Education. And because even in our areas of education, we have cultures. But they begin this book with a discussion just about kind of culture broadly, and they talk about it as, the shared implicit, explicit rules, traditions that express beliefs, values, goals for a group of people. But then they bring in the work of James Banks, who teased out the multiple layers and experiences of individuals, and that we belong to several groups, and how attached or detached we feel from those groups, it changes. And so actually we can think of context and relate it to variability. So sometimes we feel more connected to that group, sometimes we feel more detached. So ultimately what he's talking about is a cultural identity. It's highly individualized and it's multifaceted. And something that I was reflecting on when I went back to this reading is that that individualized part we think of kind of internally. We internalize that part. And before, I would have thought of multifaceted as something external, meaning all these different facets that are outside of me. But then I realized that in my learning about variability, the multifaceted is actually internal. And so we are multifaceted and our students are multifaceted. And so just as we don't want to stick anybody with a certain learning style, we don't want to stick our students and demand them to be a part of a specific cultural group. We need them to investigate that. We need them to have those good moments of metacognition and thinking about who they are, and to realize that multifaceted part of their own lives.
We're having some really interesting conversation coming in from the chat box as well. So, and I also want to thank Maya for being here live in the audience. That's fabulous. We didn't plant her here. That is very interesting.
There is a newer edition. She is right. So
if there is anything that you want to add to this conversation, Maya, please feel free.
Please do. Oh my gosh, I'm so honored.
And so I think this is a fabulous opportunity for us to actually just back up for a moment and really make sure that we're thinking clearly, or just broadening our own thinking about this terminology. There's a lot in the literature with a lot of different terms, from variability, diversity, there's culturally relevant pedagogy. I, for some reason, have a really hard time saying those three words together, CRP. I've just been reading more about culturally sustaining pedagogy, which is very interesting. So I'm just hoping you both can help me back up for a moment and really think about these different terminologies and how they fit together, and just to make sense of some of the terms that are out there. Joni, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. The authentic school experience. There will be a couple more of those coming, so I apologize. There are a lot of different terms out there. Culturally relevant pedagogy, culturally responsive teaching. There's now reality pedagogy is kind of something that people are talking about a little bit. And so one of the things that, the term that I always come back to, I guess the term that for me is culturally responsive teaching. So when I think about culturally responsive teaching, that really is it's a two-part definition. One, cultural diversity that centers on content, so what we teach. Who and what are we representing in that content? And the critical part about that is that we really want to represent multiple perspectives. We want to represent diverse histories. We want to highlight historic contributions from kids, from women, from men who are from all different kinds of backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds and socioeconomic backgrounds. And one of the things that, to me, in the content part that I think is essential and also the fun part to me is showing kids lots of different kinds of people in lots of different levels of success and power and roles. I have recently been doing facilitating the math adoption process at my school district, and we've been talking a lot about this. How do we find resources that will help facilitate this in our classrooms? And one of the things that somebody came in with was an article from the New Yorker, and it was about a group of Black women who had worked for NASA back when they were doing some of the first launches, and these women were responsible for the most complex math, and what rested with them was some of the most critical data about trajectory and the launch. And it was, so to me, like, that's a beautiful thing, like for girls to see that, women in that kind of position, and to see African American women in that kind of position, and to see lots of different kinds of people and lots of different levels of success. Yeah. So that's one part, that's the content, right? The other part is the pedagogy, when we address cultural variability. And so with that, it's kind of taking all of those content pieces and any other kind of curriculum you're including and teaching it in multiple ways. And whether you're new to UDL or you're the crazy UDL lady, the hope is that when you see those words, like, oh, you're going to teach it in multiple ways, the hope is that you say, oh, okay, so you mean like multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, multiple means of action and expression. And to that we say, yes, that's exactly, that is the intersection. To me, like, that is the intersection for culturally responsive teaching and the UDL framework. That when we say we want to take those really great, rich pieces of cultural diversity and teach them in diverse ways, those diverse ways are indeed then the three UDL principles.
I feel like music should come out here. Very Loui, what are your thoughts on that? What would you like to add, shift, change?
Yeah, so I absolutely agree with Joni. So we build that content based on what we know, or if we're really actively informed, then we're gaining shared knowledge from our colleagues, from our students, from families, from other community members. And we design our pedagogy using our evidence-based research-based practices, right? And like those that are suggested through the UDL framework. So, okay, books that we have in our classroom, we often choose our books based on content. So I'm thinking about when we build our personal libraries in our classrooms, but how we use them. So the discussions that we're going to have and the experiences that we want our students to have in understanding different viewpoints, again, different cultures, those kind of things, that's our pedagogy. And so thinking of those two things together, bringing those two pieces together and helping that, using that to guide our selection of our books as we're choosing what our readers are going to be, is an example of how we're bringing those two pieces together.
And it really seems as though in having that flexibility for what resources we're bringing together, that's where the variability of our educators and of our systems is really, woo!
There's going to be one more.
We don't hear kids screaming, it's good. But we're really able to use, we often, so I have, you noticed I put the UDL guidelines right in my background here, but every teaching strategy ever really aligns to this framework. So as both you and Joni were saying, that that the content that we choose to use and the resources we use can be aligned to this and can represent the diversity of the learners that we know that we have in our classrooms. Did I summarize that all right?
I think so.
We're thinking not only about then the perspectives and the values and backgrounds and the community as a whole as we're designing these lessons. It's so much more than just the content that we're bringing to life. However, I guess I'm gonna, but
you're all tardy.
But help me out. I may have hundreds of students. So my second year teaching, I had 145 students. It was overwhelming. And There were dozens of backgrounds, and I just recently learned of a district here in Massachusetts where they speak over 120 languages. I didn't know that even that many languages could exist in one district. It was phenomenal to hear that. So I know in my heart, I know that there's opportunity in this diversity, but it can feel so overwhelming as an educator. How can we possibly design for this diversity, and how can we value this challenge as an opportunity to really build and sustain inclusive practices that promote not only learning but high level learning of all of our learners. This feels really big. I want to do it, but it feels very big. So what are your thoughts on this, Joni? I guess I'll just turn it over to you.
Okay. So yeah, overwhelming to think. When I talk to teachers about culturally responsive teaching and start talking about awareness of who are you teaching and what is the cultural variability that's represented in your classroom, no doubt. The thing that is said to me is on a secondary level. I mean, you mentioned how many kids you had coming through, right? So I mean, I've got teachers who are seeing 160 kids a day. And so the question is, how am I supposed to know? How am I supposed to know how everyone approaches a challenge? How am I supposed to know how everybody wants to collaborate? How am I supposed to understand everyone's notion of fairness? How am I supposed to understand all of these various hidden rules of their cultural backgrounds? And then on top of it, not just know it, but then honor it in my instruction, right? And that seems so incredibly daunting. What I would say is, here's some relief for you. You don't have to be the lone cultural resource in the room. We don't want you to be. That's actually, if I use my own knowledge, and if I use only my own research around cultural perspectives, and I only use that in my classroom, the truth is I'm telling my students' story, and I'm making assumptions about their stories, right? And there's nothing more disempowering than you being somebody, than telling somebody else's story or having someone else tell your story. And so you don't have to know everything. What you have to do is facilitate conversations and opportunities for your students to really start revealing these various pieces of culture. So they, what we want to do is design opportunities for kids to reveal what they value, for kids to reveal their notion of family, for kids to reveal their preferences for cooperation or collaboration and challenge or independent learning. What we want to do is design opportunities throughout the year for kids to really kind of reveal their cultural backgrounds. And then as the teacher, then I'm the data collector, right? I design the opportunities for you to start talking, and then it's my job to start taking in that data so that I can start tucking it into my instruction. If I find out that I've got students who no doubt, right, are living in single parent homes. I mean, that's kind of a given these days, right? So when I start thinking about representing diversity in my classroom, I'm going to show my kids single parents who are wildly successful and in positions of power. I mean, that's a given. And so I have to think about lots of different cultural perspectives represented there, but I'm not expected to know them all. I'm just expected to give people an opportunity to share it.
So that did help the weight on my shoulders feel lighter. Very well said. Loui, how would you like to add to that? I'll turn to you here.
I like one of the things that Joni just ended with, the fact that we know, for example, that so many students come from that single parent family situation. That's that concept of the known variability. It's a piece that we know that we want to build in and design into our environment. In thinking about this cultural variability piece, but that's of course a root of UDL, right? We design from the beginning, considering the variability that we anticipate to be present, and then also returning to that Aaron Meyer work that Joni referred to earlier on. So giving the students the opportunity to sense that they know what trust looks like and feels like. So when we give the students kind of the reins in the classroom, they start to sense and gain a little bit more sense of that trust. So what are some first steps that we can take? Well, when the students are working on those metacognition activities, I kind of referred to those earlier, they're thinking about their own thinking and they get the chance to discuss those thoughts. So lots of thinking in there. So give them time to reflect on those prompts, like what was the most challenging, what was most confusing, what strategies did you learn well, or what strategies did you use while learning this material? How did that learning, how did that go for you? And using those feel like really broad questions, and they're like, well, how does that relate to cultural variability? It's helping them get to know themselves. Again, it's reflecting on who they are as learners. Another strategy, the KWL charts that we know, the know, wonder, and learn charts. So they're a great way to organize this. And again, so where does this connect to the cultural variability? Well, it's helping see the students see themselves as individual learners. But when we help students reflect on what they already know, they're reflecting on their background knowledge. They're reflecting on who they are as learners. So sometimes we need to make this a little bit more concrete for them to realize and for them to celebrate, oh wow, this came from my background. I have valuable pieces to who I am and how I contribute. So making that a little bit more explicit can help touch on that cultural variability piece and lay that really good, strong groundwork for the increased collaboration of our students as they begin to value one another's input to the classrooms.
So if I can just summarize, this is really helpful. So we're thinking proactively about variability from the beginning through the UDL lens. We know there'll be variability in engagement, representation, and action and expression. And then we want to model, we want to prompt, we want to self-reflect, we want to observe, we want to collect data, and we want to make it concrete. We want to give process-oriented feedback about how it's going. And so students are starting to build that trust, and they're increasing that collaboration that they're having, and we're facilitating all of that through the design, but also through the modeling that we're offering them to build. And as someone's kind of stepping out of their comfort zone and building from there. So there was a question that I think is interesting here, and that's, you know, when we're talking about, we were highlighting just a few moments ago about cultural variability and giving our own cultural identities. So there was a question: how do we address white students in the Midwest in terms of having an identity of a culture? So I'd be curious to hear if you just have a quick response. I know there is no quick response, but try to give just a very quick response, because I really do think it fits into what we're talking about here when we really start to think about variability and we start thinking about lesson design and how we're building and modeling all of this. What does that mean for this mythical average individual who we know doesn't exist? Read Todd Rose's The Myth of the Average. But do you have any quick ideas to offer here?
Oh gosh, I think it's, so every single person, we have a cultural identity, and it's important that we investigate that and we get to know who we are and how we interplay with others and their cultural identity, because we create that community. So, gosh, this so connects to creating a community in your classroom. We know the most effective learning settings are when you have a community of learners and they see how they're integrated and they see how they enhance one another's learning. And that's where this variability piece comes in. So I think, Allison, you were saying that the point was maybe that the classroom is it seems more homogeneous because there's majority of white students. But helping those students see and parse apart their own backgrounds and to see how unique and different they are within their own cultural foundations could help them see that heterogeneous piece.
And even in modeling right here in our conversation, you know, only one component of the three, well, actually a lot of us here we are white women and we are educators. And so that might initially seem like our cultural identity would be similar, but I'm sorry, Joni, you got me with the hog rearing. You know, there's some diversity there that I had no idea is part of the lens that you'll bring to the conversations we have. And I value that, and I can't wait to learn more about it. And so even just in those little conversations, highlighting how it's really, it goes so much, well, and we've mentioned this a number of times, that it's fluid, it's dynamic, it's context dependent, it's multifaceted. So it's so much more interesting. Joni, did you want to add to that?
I would just say that one of the things I think that's difficult but critical is to really expand your thinking about culture. That we're not just talking about ethnicity. We're not just talking about things that can be represented by a flag. We're also talking, I mean, just to say, well, I don't really have a lot of diversity in my classroom. It's like, you have kids who are on free and reduced lunch and kids who are not. You have kids whose parents are college educated and kids who are not. You have kids who are living with addiction. You have kids who are living with divorce, who are living with mental illness, who are living with lots of different things. And those all make up the cultural perspectives that they bring to our classroom. And one of the things that came up in one of the trainings I was doing today, which I thought was really interesting, is that, you know, we talk about culture being fluid for us as individuals, but the truth is that it is also for a community. I teach work in a district where we've got just over 44% of our students on free and reduced lunch, and that changed drastically because of a major flood in 2006. We saw a huge jump. So when you think about that, it's like there are lots of things that affect our culture and our cultural identities, and it's true not just for individuals, but also for, you know, our student populations.
So what I think this is leading directly to what we're talking about next, and some of the questions are already starting to go there of, well, so what are some strategies? So you've already started to offer some concrete strategies to address cultural variability, which again can lead us, given that we're here talking about UDL, we're going to, you know, turn to the UDL guidelines. So how can we design flexible curricula and environments with multiple pathways to expertise that empower learners to value and integrate their experiences, their background, their culture, so that they're really building high-level expert learning here? Who wants to kick it off? Loui, go for it.
So first, I'll just clarifying expert learners, because I know we had some zeros, ones, and twos in the group. So really quickly, so an expert learner, these are as learners, we're always continually growing, learning, improving wherever learning takes place, and it's a process that happens on a continuum. Sometimes when we think of experts, we think that this person has reached a pinnacle, but those very people would help us understand that they're on their own continuum of growth constantly. And so when we also have this favorite term in the US of lifelong learners. How does that connect? Well, it's within expert learners, but what I love about expert learners, and this term related to UDL, is that it's defined. So we want our students to be purposeful and motivated. We want them to be knowledgeable and resourceful. We want them to be strategic and goal-directed. But they need support in gaining these skills, and that support has to be culturally variable. So that's where the guidelines and the checkpoints, they come in, and we use those to help us design our environment and support the growth in those outcomes. So I've done that little part, and I think Joni's gonna talk more specifically with those boxes on the screen.
Great, great. So, and also just, I'll jump in. So because we've highlighted those boxes doesn't mean that's the only piece you would want to use at all. But again, given your goal, you are going to pick and choose the UDL guidelines as you find it to be most supportive of that learning goal. So now I'll turn that over to Joni.
So, you know, I just threw these boxes around here because I thought, I think we want to know, like, okay, well, tell me something specific to think about or talk about or to take back to my classroom. And so that's the reason those are here. Certainly not not exhaustive of the ways that you would connect cultural responsiveness to the UDL framework, but
No,
these are some great starting places. So when I look at, for instance, providing options for recruiting interest, right? It's easier for me to help my kids find the why, right? To find that relevant value and authenticity if I know what they value, if I know what their families value. And one way to do that is to, you know, as we kind of talked about before, facilitating those conversations, get your kids talking about what are some things that you value. Talk to me about trust. What are some things and some people that make you happy? What are things that your family values, and how do you spend your leisure time? So things like that, I think, can help me get my kids to really find relevance in a whole new way, a deeper way. As I continue kind of looking and go to looking at providing options for sustaining effort and persistence. Again, I mean, we've got a checkpoint here that says foster collaboration and community. And we already kind of talked about, you know, some people's notion and tendencies to collaborate often depends on the level of trust in the group, which is established in different ways. But we also inevitably have kids every time that I say, well, we're going to work in groups. You've got somebody who says, do we have to work in a group?
That was always me.
Yes. And so I think the thing to think about is, you know, when people ask questions like that, when kids ask questions like that, to me, I always think they are inevitably revealing a barrier to me, right? I don't want to work with someone. I just like to work by myself. I don't feel like a collaborative learner. And we know that student needs and preferences vary from one task to another, from one environment to another. So in this environment and on this specific task, I may be really, really excited about collaborating. But when I get into a different learning environment and on a different task, I might not really feel like I want to collaborate for any reason. When I look at representation, I think about activating background knowledge. What a great place to bring your kids into your classrooms as cultural resources, right? Tell me what you know about this. Tell me what your experience is with this. And inevitably, you got kids revealing things that make them really unique cultural resources to your classroom. When we talk about maximizing transfer and generalization, I mean, we're talking about asking kids to think about what we're learning about in class, and thinking about, and so then how does that translate to some other class or some other unit of study or some other part of your life. And so that other part of your life for our kids is all different, right? So where one kid might find it to be really, really useful in some other part of their life, some other kid might say, well, I guess I don't have that. I don't have that. So I have to find a different way to transfer that information. So these are just some examples, I guess. I mean, we could keep going through these checkpoints, but the ones I threw boxes around there are ways, they're at least, I think they're starting points. They're places where we can kind of broaden our perspectives on student support through engagement and representation and action and expression.
You know, it makes me think a little bit. I'm wanting to give some very concrete takeaways for folks, and you've mentioned a number, so I'm just going to give a really small example. I was working with David Rose a couple years ago in one of his graduate school courses, and he just offered one simple option for how students contribute to a class discussion. So his goal was for class contribution, and kind of like you've both been saying, that doesn't always work for some learners. And so instead of identifying different learners, what he did was in the learning environment, he said, okay, you have two options to collaborate. One could be to participate in class verbally, or the second could be to use our back channel, which one example, just to give you a tool, is called Today's Meet, which is it's a lovely, it's a free version, free way to be able to have a very quick back channel. And so just through that one option, he was able to open doors to many students that he didn't even anticipate being able to open the door for. So again, he's designing a choice in the learning environment. He's doesn't have to be overwhelming with choices. You never need to use all of these different guidelines. But there were students who were able to participate maybe because something had happened that day and they didn't want to verbally participate, or maybe they physically weren't in class and they were able to contribute through the back channel. Perhaps someone had just worked a night job and they were tired that morning in class. So you're hitting on the variability that is tied to the culture and who you are. And just by offering some of those strategies in the learning environment, you're able to make it so that the goals are more achievable for all learners. So I want to also ask you both just to think for a moment in terms of what potentially could look different in learning environments where you begin to really think about universal design and educator practice and learner outcomes through this lens of cultural responsive practice. Joni, go for this one.
Here I am. So one of the things that I think this might look like is that you have students engaging maybe in dialogues that they haven't engaged in before. That from an educator's perspective, you might be getting input from your students that you hadn't gotten before. So for instance, one of the things that you'll see on the resources slide that you'll see in a minute is a talk by Chris Emden where he talks about reality pedagogy. And one of the strategies that he talks about in that talk is having what he calls co-generative dialogues, which is a fancy way of saying get some kids together and have them give you feedback on your teaching. But I think that that's a really powerful thing that we could be seeing more of, and that teachers could be doing more of when you start moving toward a more culturally responsive classroom. And so I think that getting a sampling of kids from your class and saying, tell me what's working for you. Tell me what's not working for you. Well, what do you think people want to learn about? Tell me about my teaching. Give me feedback on my teaching. And these don't have to be, we're not talking about having kids stay after school for an hour to give you that feedback. I mean, we're really talking about some pretty brief but very powerful conversations. And I think when those are happening on a regular basis, they really get us into being more reflective practitioners, more culturally responsive practitioners.
Thank you. So we're really, again, just looking at designing these environments, being proactive. We're observing and modeling and having conversations and facilitating the dialogue, certainly not putting any pressure on an individual student by any means, but creating a climate and a culture that really is accepting and open to the range of variability that we know we're going to have. I'm going to return to the questions in just a moment, because I want to make sure we get back to this conversation, this cartoon that we had at the very beginning, where I want to invite you all to reflect for a moment. So we've been talking about culture and cultural variability, and I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are. Where does culture fit into this picture? And Loui, I'd like to give you the chance to talk here since Joni went first last time.
Sure. Okay. So I was reading responses to this upgraded graphic that were online, and there was somebody who said, "Why isn't there a fence? Why is there a fence? Isn't that another barrier?" But I was happy to see that in the chat people saw, oh, you could see through the fence, and that was still maybe having that goal of safety, right? Yes. They can't run out in the field. But I stay with the original metaphor. So, okay, I'm just going to connect this back to the principle of representation. And so, well, firstly, I say, we're lowering the barriers for our students so that they can participate in the lesson, and the lesson can just effectively move forward. So let's think about the principle of representation, and a lesson that I just saw in Singapore recently. So they were reading a book, and little animals were bringing another animal little gifts, right? Little children, not early childhood, but young elementary. And one of the gifts they brought was a soccer ball. Well, the U.S. is just about the only place that calls it soccer. Everyone else calls it football. And the teachers were thinking about the background knowledge of their learners. And so they had a picture ready of what a soccer ball really looks like, football really looks like, versus what the cartoon drawing was. And they brought one in so that students could go, oh, yeah, now we understand what it is, and they could move forward. Another example there was in the book, they had gloves. And within that setting, when you're so close to the equator, you're not going to wear gloves very much. Some of these students do go skiing in Korea, or maybe they'll go down to Sydney in the winter months and have that experience. But they maybe not. They also have an indoor arena where they can go experience snow in Singapore. But for students who haven't experienced putting on gloves, they had that opportunity, right? So we may think about that as just a really good model of representation, and we would. And I apologize, there's a phone ringing. But we're also hitting on that cultural variability that's going to be present in that classroom because of the students who may not have had those experiences. So it's just bringing to life how we would use those principles and the guidelines to hit on that cultural variability.
Thank you, and Joni. So we have 1 minute. So, and then I want to get to resources. So in 30 seconds, what's your take on how culture can fit into this image here?
So when I look at this, I think to myself, gosh, do the kids who are standing here like baseball, know anything about baseball? Ever been to a stadium? Familiar with that stadium experience? What about team sports versus individual sports? I mean, there are so many interesting things to think about, and some things that are driven by culture, some things that are that I think that are fun to think about, right? When you're looking at an image like this, when you're trying to imagine that the cultural variability represented here, yeah, I think so. When we start talking about helping students find value, relevance, and authenticity, I mean, those are great places to start when you look at an image like this. When you say, well, what would you rather be watching? Tell me something you do know about.
And so I like taking that right there as a very concrete, actionable step that could be translated into different classroom environments. So, so there are lots of fabulous resources on this topic, and Mindy has created a bit.ly, so you can go to this resource, http bit.ly/UDL-CRT, and you can access all of these different resources. We have additional ones. So congratulations, an article by Joni just came out this week in Ed Week. So please visit that bit.ly site for that. We want to let you know we are announcing the theme today of the 2017 UDL Symposium, which will take place the end of July, early August 2017 here in Boston, is going to be on UDL and social justice. So I thought that was very exciting given our conversation today. So please look for more details on that. Please engage with CAST more. We love talking about these issues and thinking about the UDL guidelines in a broader sense. How can we bring them to life? So we ensure that we're really going on keeping the high achievement goal for all learners. We want to engage them in the goals so they're relevant, authentic, actionable, perceivable, flexible, and again, today I just really want to focus on how exciting and how important our diversity is, and that we want to embrace it, we want to celebrate it, and it is multifaceted and dynamic, and we as educators really have the ability to influence the climate and the culture of the environments where we each are, and to really enjoy and savor that. So Loui and Joni, thank you so much for contributing to the conversation today. We're going to record it, we're going to archive archive the chat. We're going to make this available so that the conversations can continue, and this is just a starting point. Thank you both so much. Do you have any last minute words for us? Or
No, thank you so much for having me. This is an exciting topic. It's an evolving topic. I think it's an urgent topic, and so it's exciting to have these conversations. And I regret that there's so many great questions coming up in the chat box that we're not getting to. But maybe we'll get a part 2 of this webinar in maybe later this year or some other time.
We can do a part 2, and we can also participate through social media as well. So we really do want to make sure that the conversation continues, that this is a huge topic, and we know 1 hour is just not, 2 hours wouldn't be enough. We could talk about, okay, Loui, anything?
Yeah, I agree that there's so much more depth to cultural responsiveness and cultural variability, and this was hopefully better than a skim. But there are some deep conversations that need to be had, and hopefully we can attend to those, like you said, either via social media or additional webinars in the future, and a part 2 or part 3, what have you.
Absolutely. So we want to thank you all for contributing so much to the chat box. We value this conversation tremendously. We value the work that you do each and every day. Education is really the most exciting field there is, but it is intense. And so thank you for all the work that you do out there with your learners every day. You all take care. Have a wonderful holiday season, and yes, look out for a part 2. Take good care. Thank you again, Joni and Loui.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to our captioner as well, and to Mindy, to Nathan, and to Alex for supporting this. Woohoo! Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.